We have three participants. Could you just write a short message in the chat to see if you can hear me and see me? Just to confirm, so I don't speak for deaf ears. Great. Thank you for that. I will. The webinar is being recorded, so it's possible to see it later as well on the Luma TV website. So unless some of you now give some serious messages about that you're not hearing, I will just start. I'm going to give a fairly short webinar, like 30 minutes, about the intersection between food and cooking. And this picture that you see here is one example of that. And I will this lecture will be focused quite a lot on examples to exemplify how this link can be done. I'll start with that picture as an example. This picture shows a mixture of an oil and a water-based solution, and the yellow part of it is a chili oil. So this contains two foods that combine to one sort of a dish. It's chili and it is blueberries or bilberries. And the yellow part contains the chili, and the red part, or the purple part, contains the blueberry. And the purple part is a vinegar, and the other part is an oil. So this is a sort of a vinaigrette. It's used for salads or things like that. But then the question is, could we make a chili vinegar? So get the red color or the orange color from the chili into the vinegar instead of the oil? We can't, and that comes from that we can describe using the chemistry. I challenge you now to think of one other thing. If you go to a cafeteria, restaurant, or if you go to a supermarket and you buy jalapeno peppers, there are these rings that are cut with like chili peppers, and you can get them on glasses. And the question is, are those glasses filled with oil or water when you have these peppers that you use for foods? And I won't wait for long now, but next time you go, you could check. And well, I'll leave it to the end of this slide. The molecule you see here is beta-carotene, and it's the yellow color or reddish color from the chili. And if you're a chemistry student, you would see that this molecule is most likely not soluble in water. It's fat soluble, but not water soluble. So the color from the chili, if you have a red chili, would dissolve in the oil and not in the vinegar. And actually, if you look at the molecular structure of capsaicin, which is the compound that makes it burn on your tongue from chili, you could see from that molecule as well that it's probably not water soluble, but it's fat soluble. So for the previous question, the jalapeno peppers, if those were in oil, the capsaicin would go, and the strong taste, the thing that's burned, will go into the oil, and the chilies would not taste much. So if you go to the shop and get one of those glasses, you would see that the chilies are in water, because then those compounds will stay in the chili and not go into the water because they're fat soluble. So you can make a chili oil, but you can't make a chili vinegar. What about the blueberries? Can you make it oil? The color compound from blueberries, the anthocyanins, many of these R's here are OH groups, hydroxyl groups. So these compounds are typically water soluble. So if you try to have the blue color of the blueberries into oil, it would not dissolve in the oil. It would stay in the water. So you can actually, you can't make a blueberry oil, but you can make a blueberry vinegar. So this way you can think of the science, then also use the science to understand some more about the food. And ideally you could use that knowledge to design food or to cook when you are cooking, to understand where is the flavors of this in this dish. Is it in the fat? So if I'm making a pot with chili and have lots of oil, and then I take away the oil, some of the strong taste would go away with the oil, for instance. Things like that. So that was just one example. And I said that I was going to talk about the intersection, the meeting between food and science. So let's go to Wikipedia, or you could go to another encyclopedia as well, to see how is food science defined. Well, if you look in this encyclopedia, it says that it gives some hints towards which direction food and science is sort of collaborating. It says that the Institute of Food Technologists, so there are some technologists around here, they define the discipline which the engineering, so it has to do with engineering, biological and physical sciences underlying food processing. So it's about the engineers, it's about food processing. It's sort of a factory focus in a way. And also, if you look in the textbook, Food Science, it says that this has to do with principles of food processing. Now, this lecture is about food and science, but it's also about education, about what goes on in upper secondary or lower secondary school. And upper and lower secondary school students, they're not there to learn about factories or what's going on in the industry. Part of it is, but just part of it. So we could ask in this definition of food science, where is the food that I showed you in the previous slide? The thinking about which compound is soluble in fat, which is soluble in water. If you are going to make something that is salt, then you can't make a salty oil, for instance, because the salt will not dissolve in the oil. Or you can make an oil with a crunch in it. If you add big salt crystals to it, then actually the salt will stay crunchy because it will not dissolve. That kind of thinking, you don't find that so much in food science. So in a way, there has been a gap between food science on this side and our home cooking, or the restaurant or the classroom on this side. So, and that has some people found that there was this gap, and that they actually discovered it maybe in the 60s, 70s, 1960s, 70s, 80s. Some people started thinking about this. What has food science developed into? Food science is all about making food in the factories and the agriculture, but the science is not present in my home kitchen. And found that why is it so that it should be so? And then they started writing books. For instance, the French chemist Hervétis started writing books. He did his PhD in a field called molecular gastronomy. Harold McGee started writing, also wrote books. He has a couple of books called On Food and Cooking and The Curious Cook. And all this happened in the 1980s and 90s. And then in the 2000s, we got a new cookbook called Modernist Cuisine, edited by Nathan Myhrvold. So some people saw that there was this gap between the cooking that people usually experience themselves and the science. And they tried to fill this gap. And some call it molecular gastronomy, some call it science of cooking, some call it gastrophysics. And if you Google molecular gastronomy, you would find lots of discussions, lots of debate, some liking it, some not liking it, some saying that molecular gastronomy is about high-tech cooking, making all these strange foods, etc. And some would say, no, it's not about that. So I don't know if it's really important to use this word or this name, but I could use molecular gastronomy, but then that would not be necessarily about high-tech cooking, but it would be about understanding the food. And in the context of the chemistry education at Helsinki University, I would say that that's also the understanding of the concept molecular gastronomy. So if you're using molecular gastronomy as a concept or word, then in our context, that would mean understanding what goes on into your food and maybe using that for some purpose. So I'm now starting on the other examples. One way of thinking molecular gastronomy is to use scientific knowledge and scientific methods to be creative. For instance, I went to a restaurant in Barcelona a few years ago, and I got this dish. It's a very small dish. This is a shot glass, so it's not bigger than this. And we got it between two other dishes, two courses. It's a restaurant called Alchimia, and they are quite inspired by molecular gastronomy or that way of thinking. What they have made was the lower solution, the transparent solution at the bottom, is a tomato soup. And when you tasted that tomato soup, it tasted really strongly of tomato. But still, it's transparent. It doesn't look like a tomato soup. So they had made, and this is a cold tomato soup. It's a Gazpacho variety. They made this the day before, and then they used some filtration techniques. In some restaurants, actually, they have now bought centrifuges so that they can centrifuge different solutions. They could take the tomato juice or tomato soup, and they could centrifuge it, and then they would take out the solution on top, and that might be transparent. On the upper layer, the brown one, is olive oil with breadcrumbs. And the breadcrumbs were crunchy. And they were floating in the oil. So whenever you took a sip of this, you would get soup and a little olive oil and a few breadcrumbs. So you would have a tomato soup with olive oil and crunchy breadcrumbs every time you took a sip. And you could sit there for several minutes, and the breadcrumbs would still be crunchy. The olive oil would be on the top. And what does this have to do with science? Well, it has to do with scientific thinking. Because when we are now talking about this dish or trying to understand how does it work, well, it has to do with which compounds are soluble or mixable. The oil does not mix with the water. and the bread floats in the oil, and the bread, probably because of the surface tension of the water, the bread does not come in contact with water, so it stays crunchy. It doesn't go soggy and soft. And also, it's about density. Some compounds or some substances float on top of the others because of their different densities. So this is, in a way, a scientific course, or a course inspired by science, or scientific thinking, scientific knowledge. Another example, another approach of combining science and cooking, or science and food, which is not industrial focus, is to use scientific thinking and knowledge to challenge accepted rules. For instance, the blog Molecule Gastronomia, Anu Hopia, food professor, she has this blog, and she has monthly meetings where anyone can join, and they explore something about food. And usually, quite often, they start with a claim, something that someone is sort of claiming about food. In this case, the claim was meat should be room tempered before cooking. Like if you are making a steak, you should take the meat out of the freezer or out of the fridge and leave it on the counter to be room tempered before you fry it in the skillet. Okay, so this is a claim, but is it true or is it not? Because we have been doing this for decades. And it's a rule that you would find in any cookbook. Chefs on TV would say it. I think most people working with food would say that this is something you have to do. But, you know, this is a claim. So what sort of information do we have to back up this claim? Do we have any facts to back it up? Do we have any reasons? And where this brings us is actually that we are moving into the field of argumentation. And argumentation is actually an important goal within science education and also other subjects, both in the Finnish curriculum, Norwegian curriculum, in the other European countries and the American curriculum. All talk about that students should learn to do argumentation based on scientific knowledge, etc. So this is actually now an interesting start for doing argumentation, to check, to look up in cookbooks or look up on the web to see is there any information to back up this claim. We have done some research and done some work on this, and you can read about that elsewhere. And also this has to do with source credibility. If you go on the web and you search about this, who do you trust, who shouldn't you trust, or who are more trustworthy than others, etc. So this context actually brings us into that position that we can actually talk about it. And that's a good thing for teachers to get those opportunities, because it's not always easy for teachers to find the good situations where you could do that argumentation. And actually, if you go on YouTube, you would find some videos, and we can now discuss: should we trust these videos or should we not? Are they credible? Are the experiments done there? Are they done properly, or should we do it otherwise, etc.? Is this scientific or not? And if you watch this video, and there is at least one other, is about cooking frozen steaks. So it's not only that you should take your steak out from the fridge from 4 degrees to 20 degrees in the room, but it's actually taking your steak straight out from the freezer. It's frozen, minus 18 degrees or whatever, and then frying it straight into oil when frozen. And what they show in this video is that if you do it that way, if you fry it in really hot oil from frozen, and then you put it in the oven, pack it in plastic, put it in the oven, and leave it there for 100 degrees or 68 degrees or whatever for a long while, they would say that you get a better result. So actually, it's the opposite from the common rules. And this experiment was also done in Anu Hopia's molecular gastronomy club this month, actually, in January 2015. And they came to some of the same results, that it was actually difficult when her chef Tatu did this comparison, and we did blind tasting. We found that there was not really clear which gave the best result, maybe even slightly towards the one that was cold. So sometimes the rules have to be redefined using science. Next example, the link between food and science can help us to understand and develop things based on really new scientific evidence. So like there is coming a new scientific paper, and we could use that knowledge. That has been much more in the focus the last 10 years maybe, or 15, than before, because coming with the wave, or whatever you say, the trend of science-based cooking or molecular gastronomy or whatever, researchers have started to become interested in doing research in home cooking and restaurant cooking, and not only industrial food production. And one example is, how can we make the perfect egg? So this picture, this is how I would like my egg. The white should be solid, and the yellow part should be soft and partly liquid. Okay, so how can we do that? Can we use science for this? Well, actually, I did some experiments on this, and I started reading some books, Harold McGee's book, as I mentioned previously, and Hervé. And what Hervé writes is that, well, eggs are mainly water, proteins, and some fats. And the proteins, the egg white is mostly water and proteins. The egg yolk is water, proteins, and some fat. And this is similar to meat. And what makes an egg cook solid is mainly a question of the proteins coagulating, or denaturating and coagulating. Okay, so there is some resemblance between meat and egg. And if you look in the literature, you would say that the white starts coagulating at 62 degrees, the yolk coagulates at 68. I will now leave you in 15 seconds to think, what consequence does this knowledge have if it's correct? Yeah, you could actually, that's a very good point, Klaus. What if you leave the egg at somewhere between 62 and 68 for a long time? Because we are used to cooking our eggs at 100 degrees. Either we cook the water, boil the water, and then plop the egg into that from room temperature or from fridge temperature straight up to 100, or we leave it in the cold water and then heat it up until 100, and then we'll keep it at 100 degrees, and then we take the time, and we hope that at this point then the white should be solid and the yolk should be soft, and we can take it out and maybe even put it in cold water to stop the process going further. But that's sort of leaving things to chance. But thinking scientifically, if we could leave the egg at 64 or 65 degrees for a long time, then we could ensure that the white is solid and the yolk is still soft. So I did that experiment. You see, this is a typical lab setup. You could do it in a home at home as well. If you have lots of water, a kitchen thermometer, and try to keep the temperature stable. But I thought, let's take this the whole way. So I put this this thermostat 64.9 degrees, and I left it. I started it on one day, and then I left it to the next day, actually, to be entirely sure. You could leave it for 1 hour or half an hour, but I chose to leave it for 26 hours for an experiment, just for fun. And what happened was that at 68 degrees, it all became solid, but at 65 degrees, and it's not easy to see in the leftmost left-hand side, but the soft one on the right-hand side in the middle. What I saw was that the yolk was solid, more or less solid, and the white was still partially liquid. So when I cut the egg and I opened it, then the yolk was rolling out and the white was pouring out. So really strange, upside down egg. It was actually cooked more in the middle than on the outside. Really strange. I was really surprised, because from these results or from these numbers, it shouldn't be like this. But if you look closer at the different proteins, because it's not only one type of protein in the yolk and one type of protein in the white, there are actually a cocktail of different proteins, and what you see is that the white starts coagulating at 62, but the main protein in the white actually coagulates at up to 80 degrees or something like that. And the yolk actually coagulates more and more, also depending on time and not only temperature. And in 2011, a research paper appeared in the journal Culinary Biophysics about this phenomenon. They had taken these eggs and they had made a little hole and put temperature probes inside into the yolk and left them in water baths. And that's what you see with the temperatures here, 66, 65, 64, etc. They had left them for a certain long time at these temperatures, and then at the y-axis here you see the viscosity, how hard it becomes. And you don't need to understand this chart now, but it just I'm just showing it so that you can see that someone actually did some research on this. But I think the really mind-blowing thing about this is not that someone did it, but if you see the year, it's 2011. Okay, so let me present to you now the idea that someone was able to do research and publish a paper in a scientific journal in 2011 about cooking an egg. I think that's a mind-blowing fact to me. It's not a typing error. It's not 1911 or 1811. It's 2011. So someone would ask if this is actually a valid publication. What has science been doing for 200 years if no one had actually studied what happens when you're cooking an egg? And there has been food science for a long time. Food science was one of the early food chemistry was one of the early topics within chemistry. But no one has, until 2011, done this kind of study to analyze what happens in the yolk of an egg when you're boiling it in water or cooking it in water. And I think that emphasizes something about one of the first slides I showed, the definition of food science, having mostly focus on food processing, industrial food manufacture, rather than cooking. And then these authors of this paper actually have tried also to make this available to those who are cooking, to the chefs and others, by taking this viscosity scale and trying to say that, okay, so if you want your egg to be like your yolk, you want to make that to be like mayonnaise. If you want your yolk to be like mayonnaise, it's that's about viscosity of 12. So then look at this one, look up 12. So if you leave your egg for 62 degrees, that would take you approximately 75 minutes at 62 degrees to reach a viscosity of 12. Or at 63 degrees, it would be like 40 minutes. So they have actually tried to make the link to, in a way, not maybe everyday egg cooking, but for those who are really interested, or for those who are working in special restaurants, etc. Okay, so this was about new research being relevant to food, and then this could be used quite creatively. And here are some examples of different dishes based on this principle that the yolk coagulates at certain temperatures for a certain time. And the uppermost left one, which with the crackers, that's goose fat crackers by a chef called David Barcelet. Duck eggs on duck fat crackers, and then in that case he has separated the yolk and white before cooking. The lowermost on the left is by a chef called Chad Galliano, and there he cooked the yolks and then rolled out. So the sheet there is actually egg yolk. The lowermost to the right with the asparagus are two chefs and cookbook authors called Aki Kamosawa and Alexander Talbot, and they have also thin sheets of egg yolk around asparagus. And the uppermost right is actually Anuhopia, and I think it's either Tatu Leftovara or it is Artur Rastas, one of her collaborators. And this is the uppermost right one is then their 65 degree egg, where they have actually cooked the egg in 65 degrees water, and then they cut it open, took out the yolk, and left the yolk at some temperature, maybe in oil or something, and then they fried the egg white, and then they put the yolk on top. So this is sort of an innovation. Yeah, that was another example, and yet another example or possibilities of linking science and food cooking to see how these work together is to apply scientific and critical thinking. And this is the last example I will come with mention, although we might find more examples as well. And from there, I'm getting some inspiration from a Swedish scientist called Östen Dahlgren. And actually, this is not very recent. He published a book in 1994. So he wasn't He was quite early. Harold McGee published his book in 1984, which was one of the early books on this topic that was sort of really thorough. And Helvetius, I think he took his doctorate in molecular gastronomy also in the late 80s, I think. But this book, 1994, and I'll just take one thing from the sleeve of the book. He wrote, he had 5 basic rules or cardinal rules for cooking. And the book is called Cooking, How You Do It and Why. So it's very close into the thinking of what I would say is molecular gastronomy. The first is be critical to recipes. So actually this has to do with being having some source awareness, being able to ask, is this credible or not? And this is a typical thing that you would want to teach in science or home economics in lower secondary and upper secondary school. Source awareness, source criticism. And then the second out of 5, stop and think, should I actually do it this way? This is a bit like logic, but still it's being reflective about what you're doing. Third is think of how the heat spreads. This has quite a lot to do with physics and chemistry, things like that. And it's also about analytical thinking. And 4, think over what's soluble in what. Solubility, miscibility, things like that. The thing about the example from the vinaigrette that I showed in the beginning with the blueberry vinegar and the chili oil, or the small dish, the soup in the shot glass I showed, that the oil does not mix with the soup and the bread stays in the oil. And then the 5th is taste often while you are cooking. And that might not sound like a very scientific thing, but actually it could be quite scientific, because when you are tasting, you are using your analytical senses. You could say, I like it or I don't like it, but you could also use the tasting situation to promote sensory awareness and, in a way, a sort of literacy to describe what you are tasting. You could use sensory evaluation techniques or thinking from sensory evaluation techniques, in which is actually a field of science, field of food science. And if you're interested in tasting and the scientific perspective on thinking, I did a webinar previously, a couple of months ago, and you can find that on Luma TV as well. The same place that this webinar also will be saved, and you can look at it later. And it's about measuring taste. It's not a sensory scientist talking about measuring taste, because I'm not a sensory scientist. I am an educational researcher and pre-service teacher educator, but it's me as a chemistry educated person focusing on education and trying to extract things from food science and use that for educational purposes. So I've spent, well, a bit more than half an hour talking, and I think I'll wrap it up here. Thank you for being there, and if there should be anything, you're free and welcome to contact me. So thank you, and if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat, or we could do it at a later point as well. Just you have my email address, and some of you are students, that maybe all of you students at the Helsinki University, so you can also meet me. But I'll stay online for a minute or two to see if there are any questions coming right now, because then we can take them. Yeah, Kajsa, you're welcome. If you're cooking eggs, and if you want to do this, experiment, there is one thing I could mention. Use lots of water. Use loads of water. So a good strategy would be to start with a really big pan, because water has a heat capacity, high heat capacity. So if you're able to get the temperature where you want, if you have a small amount of water, you have to adjust all the time, because the temperature will go up and down and up and down and up and down. But if you have lots of water, it would keep the temperature very much more stable. That's why the sea is regulating the climate of the Earth as well, right? Because the sea is really big and water has got a high heat capacity. So if you have a 10-liter pan, you could fill that up, and you could put 1 egg or 2 eggs in that. You fill it up with, and then you could start with the hottest water that you get from the tap, and then use a thermometer. And you can add some boiling water or cold water to adjust to 65 degrees, so that you start at 65. Because if you start with cold water and turn the heat on, the temperature would go up, and then what would happen is that you would overshoot, so you get to 68, 69, 70, and then you have to add cold water, and you will be going back and forth. So if you're able to mix in the beginning so that you get 64 or 65 degrees, and you have lots of water, you have a very good starting point. And then you could keep your oven on like 1 or 0.5 or something like that to keep it stable. So that's a good tip if you want to try this experiment. Yeah, okay, so thank you for showing up. I will be logging off, and keep in touch if you have any questions. Bye for now.